Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to welcome you to this new webinar. Today we will look at the famous ADKAR model, probably more notorious than Prosci itself. The ADKAR model, which was developed nearly 2 decades ago by Prosci founder Jeff Hyatt, is one of the 2 models of the Prosci methodology, and it is the acronym for the 5 outcomes an individual needs to achieve for change to be successful. Change has become the new operating model norm in many organizations in our constantly evolving world. And we are all confronted with it, whether in a professional or a personal context. The natural reaction to change is resistance. And in many cases, resistance is useless or even just an obstacle on the way to an objective we want to achieve. Understanding the ADKAR model helps identify where you are struggling and how to solve the bottlenecks. The ADKAR model has already helped many people worldwide achieve better results in their project by progressing through the 5 steps. The model is used today by thousands of change leaders around the world. The webinar is just starting and it will be given in English. The webinar today is presented by Morten Kemp Andersen, that probably some of you already know. Morten is one of the most experienced change management experts in Europe. He's a certified Prosci instructor, he has trained many active change practitioners, and he is recognized as a thought leader in the field. For him, change management is a real passion. He defines himself as a change evangelist with an ambitious mission on his LinkedIn profile, making the head of HR as important as the CFO, and that's a challenge. Morten is also an author about change management, and if change management is a topic of interest for you, I can only encourage you to connect with Morten on LinkedIn and follow his publication. Welcome to those who have just joined and are trying to get on the train. No worries, the webinar has just started. Before we go further, let me give you 2 practical details about the webinar's conduct. You can ask a question throughout the whole session by using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will answer all of them at the end of the presentation, and if we do not have time, we will answer in written after the presentation. If you have technical questions, use the chat button and I will try to help you as much as I can. We will also use Poll Everywhere to ask you some questions and get your input on some topics during the webinar. Most of you have also received a document from me a couple of hours ago. So if you have a look at your mailbox, you should see me in the list of sender this morning. Please use this document throughout the webinar. Morten will encourage you to fill the document. It's a good exercise to not learn the theoretical aspect of ADKAR, but to practice on yourself. How does Polyv work? The only thing you have to do is just to connect to polyv.com/nexum and enter your name or an alias, or you can download the Poll Everywhere application from your favorite app store on Google or Apple. While you connect to Poll Everywhere, let me repeat briefly what you will learn today. We will answer the following question. Why do some change fail while others succeed? The success of most changes depends mainly on the human side of change, and this is very often neglected. Successful change is rooted in how to facilitate change with one person at a time, but in a structured way. And this is what the ADKAR model is all about. I hope you will leave this webinar with a clear understanding of the ADKAR model, and above all, you will go with concrete elements to help you apply it in your change on a professional or personal project. All I wish is an excellent webinar. Morten, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks for that, Renaud, and welcome to today's webinar entitled ADKAR, a model for individual change. This is a Prosci webinar delivered by Nexum. I really appreciate that you've taken time out of your busy calendars to engage and discuss, which I think, frankly, is the best model in the entire world, which is the ADKAR model. It's one of the most fundamental models in change management, probably more, as Renaud also said, more known than Prosci itself. I'll also begin by saying that I did a podcast interview with Tim Creasy from Prosci about ADKAR a while back. If you're interested in more details about ADKAR, you should go and check that one out. It's on our website, but also maybe Renaud, you can shoot a link in the chat during this webinar. Let me just start by introducing myself. So my name is Morten Kamp Andersen, and I work as a partner here at Nexum. I've worked in change management for many, many years now, both on specific projects, but also as a trainer in change management using Prosci methodology. And for some of you, I know that this is coming into this webinar. It might be a little bit of a refresher. You might have heard about ADKAR already. And I'm going to challenge you to some more advanced applications of ADKAR. For those of you who are completely new to ADKAR, this is the first time that you hear about it, I'll say welcome to the conversation. ADKAR is the building blocks of individual change, and it is, in my view, a true cornerstone model. So with that introduction, let's begin. So the webinar agenda is, first of all, we're going to set a little bit of context. I'm one of those people who like to have context for things. So first, we're going to talk about individual change and some of the challenges and opportunities there are with individual change. And then we're going to explore the Prosci ADKAR model. So if you're wondering what ADKAR even stands for, what it is, well, this is where you're going to get that introduction. Number 3, we're going to talk about ADKAR application for both a personal and a workplace challenge. So I want to challenge you to think about an application in your own personal area or in your workplace setting, and then we're going to try to apply that. Number 4, we're going to look at ADKAR for project milestones. This is where it becomes a little bit more advanced application, both for project milestones and how to activate the key roles. So that's our agenda. We have these 5 items, and I hope I'll be able to make some room in the end for Q&A, but I'll definitely stay afterwards if you have any questions. But before we go in, I just want to have a first test with you. What is your level of experience with ADKAR? So grab your smartphone or go to your browser, type in polyv.com/nexum, and then write whether this is your first exposure, whether you know a little bit about ADKAR, whether you've used ADKAR a few times, whether you've used ADKAR a number of times, or whether you're an ADKAR super user. So I'll give you a little bit of time to put in your numbers here. I can see some of you have already. There are some with some experience. That's fantastic. So 16% of you say it's your first exposure. 32% say you know a little bit about ADKAR. And again, go into your smartphone and in the browser, you can type in polyv.com/nexum, or you can download the application polyv, and then you can go in via Nexum as well. And if you have any issues logging on, please write it in the chat, and I'm sure that Renaud will help. Maybe you can send a link to the poll. That might be a good way. I can see we got many replies already, so you can see it's poll everywhere. polyv.com/nexum. So you just press that. You can see many are helping, so thanks a lot for that. Okay, so some of you have had an exposure to ADKAR already. Normally when I do my trainings, I don't say ADKAR, I say ADKAR, and that's because it is my favorite model of all of them. Okay, so thanks for that. We're going to have a few more polls later, so keep these smartphones next to you so you can help on. So I want to start with this quote. The secret to successful change lies beyond the visible and busy activities that surround change. Successful change at its core is rooted in something much simpler: how to facilitate change with one person. And this is a quote by Jeff Hyatt. Jeff Hyatt is the founder of not only of Prosci, but he is also the inventor of ADKAR, and also is the author of the book, The ADKAR Model. And what he's really saying is that when we're looking at change in organizations, we might think about change, that what the organization really needs, and maybe talk about an organizational change. But what we really should be thinking about is something much simpler, which is individual change. The ADKAR model is a result of a research exercise that was done by Jeff in over 700 companies over a 4-year period. And Jeff discovered that the most challenging problems in project execution was about people, not things. And I'm sure that you've also experienced the same. And as he was able to start identifying the cases of successful change, what were the patterns that sat underneath of those successful changes, he then released a paper called The Perfect Change. He did that in year 2000. And that was really the introduction of the ADKAR model. So by understanding what happens to people inside of a change, to each person impacted by a change, and by helping them through their individual ADKAR journeys, that's when we're able to realize the desired outcomes and the benefit of our changes. So we just want to start off with some visuals around that individual change context, because it's really fascinating to then start thinking about making the connections back from individual change, then back to the organizational change management. So the first question that we want to answer is, what is change? And quite simply, change is a movement out of a current state through a transition and to ultimately reach a future state. So change management is built on 5 tenets. And those of you who have been on the Prosci 3-day certification course, you would know this almost by heart. But just for everyone else, change management is built on 5 tenets. So 5 foundational principles that sort of underline everything that we do in change management. And tenet number 1 is that we change for a reason. There is business reasons, business drivers, competitive drivers, regulation requirements, improvement goals, strategy, whatever. All these different things inside an organization is causing us to do some things different. So changes is continuous changes everywhere. But in any case, just this transition process is going from where we are today to where we want to be in the future is really the core of a change. Now, sitting underneath an organizational move to a future state is all of the individual moves that has to take place to realize that future. So underneath of that, so whenever we're talking about a change in an organizational setting, we're really talking about something that the organization wants to achieve. So we have two departments, we want to merge them into one. Or we have an old CRM system, we want to merge into a new CRM system. Or we have a paper-based solution, we want to have an IT-based solution. All of these are organizational changes. But underneath these organizational future states are those individual current states, individual transitions to realize those individual sets of future states. And that goes with tenet number 2. Do you remember I said there were 5 tenets in change management? Tenet number 2 is that organizational change requires individual change, so that the collective output require each person to make that successful transition. So that's in a perfect world. But what we actually see in many cases is that we'll get through the transition, and hopefully everybody gets through the transition, they get to the future state, but sometimes they fall back, and sometimes they don't actually ever really leave the current state. And if we do change management bad, then we will have a situation that looks more like this. So we will not have everybody going through the transition to the future state, and we'll have a future state that looks, we call it sort of the Swiss cheese future state because there's so many holes in it. But when we lose people along the way, that's where we're ultimately sub-optimizing the desired outcomes or output from our changes. So basically, beneath all of this, and this is critical when we start to make the connection back to ADKAR, is that the true unit of change The true unit of change when we're making organizational change is actually the individual. So this means that in order to affect change in our organizations, in our business, in our communities, we must first understand how to affect change one person at a time. So again, the tenet number 2 of the 5 tenets of change management is that organizational change requires individual change. So here is a key takeaway from this entire webinar today, which is that organizations don't change, individuals do. So hopefully you're with me here, right? So this is a logical construct as we start to think about the future state of organizations. It is only that the cumulative and collective impact of the changes of the individuals who are impacted, who has to do the job differently and who has to adopt the new processes or the new systems or utilize the new tools and adopt the new mindset or whatever it is that we want them to do. It is only when we have the cumulative impact that we have the organizational change. So those things happen at the individual level so that the organization can realize the desired outcomes and benefits. So here's the next step. The follow-on question then is, so if organizations don't change, individuals do. The follow-on question to that is, well, how does this person, this individual that is impacted by the change, how does that person make a successful individual transition? And that's where ADKAR comes in. And that's exactly how we position the Prosci ADKAR model. So the ADKAR model describes what we call the 5 building blocks. We also call them elements, but the 5 building blocks that an individual needs to achieve for a change to be successful. And again, they are awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And when we apply the Prosci model to organizational changes, then it allows organizational leaders and change practitioners and project teams members and subject matter experts and so on, all to focus activities on what will help drive individual change for this particular change and produce the organizational results. So that's the individual change model that is called ADKAR. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unpack. It's a really, really simple model. And that's why I like it. I like it for 2 reasons. It's incredibly simple and therefore easy to use. And the second thing is it works. So I'm going to unpack these 5 elements or building blocks. And again, if this is the first time that you hear about the ADKAR model, it would be a great anchor for you. If you've been here before, this is a reminder, then sit back and think about a time when you actually used this already. And then we can have a little bit of a dialogue about how that worked. Okay. So here we go. So number 1 is awareness. Awareness is critically first because every change journey begins with understanding why. Not that a change is happening, but why a change is happening. So awareness is about, what is changing? Why are we changing? Why are we changing now? How does this impact us? How does this fit with everything else that we're doing? Why this solution, not other solutions, and so on? The big why. Of course, it's also, we have to articulate the nature of the change, but the why message is so critical. Why are we doing this? And as we're starting to look across a lot of changes in our organization, understanding why anchors us to the need for the change, the business reasons for the change. Hence the why and now what if we don't do this, and what is the risk of not changing? So the individual change model, the ADKAR model, begins with understanding why, and that's captured in the word awareness. D is for desire, and that's the second element. Desire is really, really fascinating one to explore. It is my favorite element myself because it often is a challenge. And if you have a background or interest in neuroscience or science of positive psychology, you will like this one a lot because here we're talking about that change involves a personal decision. So this is where we focus on messages like what's in it for me, or what's in it for us, if it's an organization or perhaps a team. Desire means that we have an opportunity to let people make a personal choice. We can influence that choice. We can't make that choice for people. They have to choose to participate themselves, but we can influence them. So there are a lot of tactics, there's a lot of triggers that we can use organizationally to help build desire. But ultimately, it's a decision by anyone impacted by a change or going through a change to decide to engage in a particular change. And for those of you who are a little bit interested in resistance to change, this is also the part of the ADKAR model where resistance comes into play. People with a level of resistance towards a change will have a low level of desire towards it. Awareness and desire kind of come packaged together sometimes, right? So we want to build awareness and desire. And once we have an understanding of why, and we've chosen to participate, now comes knowledge. Knowledge is the third element of the ADKAR model. It's the K. And this is really understanding how the work changed and what it requires. So it's understanding how to change. And that may both be during the change, but also after the change. So how do I manage through the change? And then also, how do I work? How do I need to show up differently in the future? It may include training on new processes. It often actually involves training, but it also may be skill building, an opportunity to build new skills. One of the things that we talk about here is that often when we talk about change management, we talk about that change management is not an email on Monday for training on Tuesday to go live on Wednesday. Training is something that takes time. So each of these ADKAR elements, awareness, desire, and then knowledge, are positioned in sequence to give people an opportunity to prepare themselves for knowledge. So when we start to look at awareness and desire, they really come into play is foundational elements to knowledge. So training in new tools. But knowledge is not itself, just because we've been to a training doesn't mean that we are able to do. And that's the fourth element of the ADKAR model. After knowledge comes ability. So this is where I'm making an action movement, so to speak. This is where I'm going in the right direction. I'm demonstrating capability to implementing change. I'm achieving the performance that is expected of me in terms of the behavior that is needed in terms of this change. So the gap between knowledge and ability, that's really, really interesting. A great example, if any of you have ever tried to play golf, you may have had a few golf lessons with a golf pro, but you know how difficult it is. So you think you've mastered it, you know what it's about, and then you go out on the golf course, and then it's still really hard to hit that small ball. And that's the gap between the knowledge and the ability. So I know in theory how to do it, but I need to practice many, many times before I'm able to do it. And that's also sometimes a mistake that we make on our change programs. We think that because they've been through a training program or they've seen an e-learning module, that then they are able to do it. And then we become surprised after the go live that people have a low level of productivity. And that's because we just assumed that ability followed naturally the knowledge. In my experience, in many change projects, there is a big gap between K and A, between knowledge and ability. And then the final ADKAR element that we have is the reinforcement, and that's the R. So in reinforcement, that's the place where we go back and we create sustainment for the change. So we have to reinforce change for it to be sustained, and that increases the likelihood that people will stay in the change and do it again and again and again. Remember the future state I showed you a couple of minutes ago where people fell back into the current behavior and we had this Swiss cheese future state? Well, that's what we want to avoid, right? So with reinforcement, we're able to sustain the change. And this is an area I think that most organizations simply forget this. We dissolve the project team after go live and we move on and focus on the next change. We forget to reinforce, we forget to sustain the change. It's not actually rocket science, but we just forget to do it. So reinforcement for the change is absolutely critical if we want to get all of the benefits of a change. So that's the ADKAR model, really, really quick. That's the 5 building blocks: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. I'm going to show you an example of what we call ADKAR in the wild. The ADKAR frame is a sort of a logical structure for communication. And Jeff, he was able to, he didn't invent this. He found the pattern and put a formula on it, but it's something that has been used, especially in communications, for many, many years. But this is a familiar structural format for communication. So if you look at this, you've probably seen this on one of your trips to hotels. This is a sort of a notice that could be in any room where it says "Save our planet." This is trying to conserve water. And in this particular message, it says, "Dear guests," so save our planet is the nature of the change. And then we have "Dear guests." Every day, millions of gallons of water are used to wash towels that has only been used once. So this is an explanation of why the change is needed. Then moving on to a personal decision, you make the choice. And then we have a towel on the rack means I'll use it again. A towel on the floor means please replace. So this is knowledge on knowing how to make the change. And then finally, gratitude, a way of reinforcement, gratitude to make the change stick. Thank you for helping us conserve the Earth's vital resources. So this sticker that you might have seen on most hotel rooms these days is actually ADKAR used in real life. You have the nature of the change, why it's needed, a personal decision, knowledge, and then reinforcement. And so this is an example of how it's framed and how we can use ADKAR as a common language, actually, and put it at the center of our change management effort. I will actually argue that if there was one thing that you could add to any project, change management-wise, that would make the biggest difference, it would adding ADKAR as a tool to use for your communication and for helping individuals through the change journey. That is the one thing that you can go out and do tomorrow that will make the biggest difference on most projects. Right, so that was ADKAR, going through it. Let's look at ADKAR for a personal change. So how does it look? So this is an example of an ADKAR. This is a personal story. And I'll just use a story from my own day-to-day life. You can see on this picture, you can see to the left, this is a picture of a teenage daughter room. I have a teenage daughter, she's 15, and she doesn't clean her room like I think she should clean her room, right? So I wonder whether I can use ADKAR to understand where she is in her, let's say, individual change journey, in terms of cleaning up on her room. So if I was to help my daughter, I will use ADKAR. I've actually done that on her many, many times, so she's very familiar with it. But if I did it on this particular change, the first question I'll ask is awareness, and then I will score each of the ADKAR elements from 1 to 5. 1 having no awareness, and 5 having a very, very high level awareness. So awareness, that is, to what level does she understand why she has to clean her room? So I will score my daughter at a 5 here. I've explained to her many, 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 many times why she should clean her room. I've also tell her why she should do it. So, she will not have her clothes washed if she doesn't pick it up from the floor and put it into the laundry basket. But also there might be a lot of bugs coming in, or we will not be able to vacuum the room or something like that. And so I've explained to her many, many times why I think she should be cleaning her room. So she's very high on awareness. The second element in the ADKAR is desire. So I am motivated to, I want to, I have decided to. Well, probably not surprisingly, this is where my daughter scores very low. On a scale from 1 to 5, I give her a 2. It used to be much easier to actually manipulate her a little bit with desire. I could just say, well, if you don't clean up your room, then you won't get a piece of cake on Friday evening when we all watch television together. And then she would usually clean up her room. But that doesn't work anymore. She's 15 now. She earns her own money. She can go out and buy her own cake, and she's less susceptible to that kind of manipulation. It's not 1 because she's getting a little bit interested in boys, and she has a little bit of a feeling that maybe if she wants to get people from her class back to her room, it will look a little bit better if it was clean, but she's still very low on that. Knowledge, well, I will give her a 4 on knowledge. I have shown her, I've trained her in terms of cleaning the room, and she's also paid to some degree attention. So I know that she has some knowledge on it. Ability, I'll also give her a 4. I've seen her clean her room. She has demonstrated it, so she is able to. Reinforcement, I'll give it a 2. In terms of I will continue to. We have had some, stickers you put up on the refrigerator in terms of when you have 5 stars, then you will have a, then you will get a prize. So, but then we forgot to do it, and then we had to start all over. And it really, in theory, we had something, but it really didn't work. So this is the ADKAR score for my daughter. So how you can now use ADKAR is, so the first step is to score a person on ADKAR. The second then is to identify what we call the barrier point. The barrier point is you can only have one barrier point, and that is the first place in ADKAR where you have somebody who scores a 3 or lower. So for my daughter, the barrier point is desire. So what that means is that this is where she's stuck in her personal change journey, right? And that also gives me an idea about what should I do here, right? So if I sit down with her and I explain why she should clean her room, she will roll her eyes because she is very high on awareness. She knows that, so that's not her problem. Also, if I start to train her in how to clean the room, she'll also be a little bit annoyed, because she knows exactly why it is, how to clean the room. The problem she has is she doesn't want to. She has no motivation for it. She doesn't want to do it. So that's where she is stuck. That's where I should focus. So if I want to help my daughter to clean, so have a situation where my daughter cleans her room well on a regular basis, that is where I should set in, right? So that's how you will use the ADKAR, is that you will identify a person's barrier point and set in there. Now I want to try to ask you to fill out an ADKAR for a personal story. It could be for you, it could be for somebody you know well, it could be for a spouse or partner, it could be for a child, it could be for a good friend, it could be somebody at work. But think about a change, and then think about that person, and then try to score on 1 to 5 on each of the ADKAR elements, and identify which one is the first one where you score a 3 or lower. Renaud has sent out to you a form that you can use to fill out. You can also just take a blank piece of paper and just write ADKAR, think of a personal story, and then score from 1 to 5. So I'll just give you 2 minutes to do that right now, and then I'm interested in hearing what your barrier point is.
Morten, the picture on the slide, is it a real picture of the humor of your daughter?
No, it isn't actually. I was thinking whether I should put it in, but I found one that was even messier. But the problem is, I think of that size. Okay, so I'll just give you one more minute. Think of a personal ADKAR story. Could be a friend, could be you, could be a spouse, could be anyone. Think of a particular change. Maybe they want to quit smoking, or maybe they, want to look for new employment, or whether it is a project at work. Score from 1 to 5, and let's see. Right. And then when you've done that, so identify a barrier point. And again, you have one barrier point only. So if you have several which are below 3, then it's the first one that scores a 3 or lower, that is your barrier point. So if we go again to Poly V, you have a picture here of the ADKAR elements. Drop a pin in your barrier point. And let's see where you have your individual barrier points. So grab your smartphone, grab your browser. Right, so all of the 5 ADKAR elements are in play. Most of you are typing in desire at the moment, but I also see a couple on awareness, a couple on knowledge, a couple on ability, right? But many on desire, yeah. So again, you have one only, meaning if your barrier point is reinforcement, then you will be high on awareness, high on desire, high on knowledge, and high on ability. Okay, great. So thanks for playing along with that. And hopefully what you found was that it's actually quite easy to score on ADKAR. So sometimes I get a question, when is it a 2, when is it a 3? And basically, I found that managers on projects, but HR or also individuals find it very easy to score on ADKAR. And again, whether it's a 1 or 2, that's maybe not the most important, but the most important is this a barrier for successful change? Is this holding a person back? Is sometimes the question I ask myself. So let me show you a little bit more about some of the barrier point context, because this is an important differentiation in terms of the application to the change using ADKAR. So ADKAR is so basically what you see is that you can have different barrier points, and if you look at the last barrier, it's the one at the bottom right, you can see that they score very low on all ADKAR elements, and then it is the first, then it is awareness that it is a barrier, that is the barrier point. Right. So this slide is a really, really good sort of key takeaway slide. I think we sort of call it ADKAR on a page. Basically, what you see here is that you see, we saw some of this. I did this on the personal ADKAR story as well. Awareness of the need for the change is when you hear, I understand why. Desire is, I've decided to. Knowledge is, I understand how to. Ability is, I'm able to do it. And reinforcement is, I will continue to do it. So here's a sort of a summarized definition of each of the ADKAR elements. You'll also get these slides sent out to you. And if you want to have one page that will sort of help you remembering ADKAR, I think this is the one. You can also see some of the triggers for building ADKAR here. You can see this is some of the questions that you can help activate to meet that particular barrier point, or to progress past each of these ADKAR milestones. Right. So now is the time to sort of take our mental framework into the workplace instead. So now we talked about my daughter's room. You've maybe thought about your spouse's diet or something like that. But why ADKAR is so popular is because ADKAR is a really, really good tool for helping co-workers for your project. So in the workplace, some of what we know to be true is that results and outcome of workplace changes are tied to individual employees doing their job differently. Again, that's back to organizations don't change, individuals do. And it's the cumulative and collective impact of all of those individual changes that produces the desired organizational outcome. And I know I've just said this, I know I'm repeating myself now, but this is a key takeaway is that when we are thinking, whenever we're implementing SAP or we are moving to activity-based teaching or implementing Teams or moving to Agile, whatever it is that we're doing in the workplace, it is really individuals that needs to show up differently. And that's why the ADKAR model is so useful. And the ADKAR model works really, really well with one person. It's a fascinating model because it shows in a visible way the change journey for one person, but it's also scalable for 5 people or 20 people or 1,000 people or thousands people. So the ADKAR model defines success change at scale, which means that we can easily use it in an organizational context. Also, ADKAR model is sequential, but it's not always linear. So you might do an ADKAR survey in your organization, and you might find a situation like you have on the left-hand side here, right? So the early campaigns, employees score high on awareness and desire. Now you have identified knowledge as the barrier point. You start the training, people go to the training. Now they see, wow, is that what we're doing? Is that how the change will look like? Is that how my new day will be different? And after they've been to the training, then they will actually score lower on desire. And then we have to go back in the ADKAR model, so to speak, and we have to make some desire activities to work on the desire that has now fallen a little bit. So it is a sequential model, but it's not always linear. Sometimes we can go back. Also, if there are some rumors that surface that may not be true, that can impact desire. And again, that might also mean that people score a little bit lower. Also, I'm going to add a little bit more nuance, which is that people don't change at the same pace. So even though groups might be progressing through ADKAR journeys as a group, so you might see someone like, so here we have, we have the difference here. You might see some like Elena in this example, who's lagging behind everyone, right? Maybe she was away on holiday when this was announced. So her beginning of her awareness road does not begin until much later because she was not present. So there's just a couple of nuances that come into play in the workplace that we can measure at a group level. But again, the underlying consideration and important thing is that we all go through our individual journeys in order to make this happen. Now, you can also look around you in your organization. This is another slide that I'll point you back to the slides that you'll get. There are conditions that we can observe if we're willing to look around and see what's happening of the conditions in organizations of missing ADKAR elements. So what you might see or might hear if the awareness or desire is not there, or if the knowledge or ability is not there, or the same of the reinforcement, then you might hear a lot of questions, or you might see low utilization or incorrect use of the system, or people reverting back to the old way of doing things. You can see some of the consequences of missing ADKAR elements. So there's really some interesting things that you can start to discern yourself once you put on your ADKAR glasses. Right, so that was the sort of what I'd call the basics of the ADKAR. Now I just want to show a little bit about ADKAR for project milestones. So we've come to the point 4 of our five-point agenda, which is the ADKAR for project milestones. So let's have a look at how the ADKAR milestones go together with project milestones. what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to align ability with go live, so that everybody who's impacted by a change has an opportunity to go through awareness, desire, knowledge, and ability prior to go live, so they are at ability when we get to the go live. And that means that you need to start planning now for when you're going to share those awareness messages, when you're going to pull the triggers of influence for desire, when you're going to identify the knowledge barriers that people need to work through, so you can have ability at go live. And then you can start mapping those ADKAR milestones to the project milestones. Unfortunately, most people kind of pack all of those things into, as I said, the email on Monday for training, for Tuesday to go live on Wednesday. So we mistakenly think that we can do this in a very, very short period of time. Most of the times we cannot. This is a very waterfall approach. And if you're wondering what it might look like in an iterative or an agile type delivery, well, then we can actually break those ADKAR milestones down into the project or the initiative. So maybe we do awareness and desire for the project or the initiative level, and then we do knowledgeability for the sprints or the releases, and then reinforce at the sustainment level. So even if you're doing an iterative or even a hybrid change, I want to challenge you to think about what the ADKAR milestones might look like in your particular project. And it's really a fascinating application. In fact, one of the things that we're doing a lot of these days is that we're building out some more modeling around something called the ADKAR blueprint. And those of you who've been through the 3-day certification program recently, you will also have seen the new models that Prosci have produced and will be familiar with this one. Now, through the blueprint, each ADKAR element becomes a milestone with target dates. And again, ability is our go live date. So what is the anticipated gap in awareness? And what are the anticipated gap in knowledge? And is it a little bit, or is it a big hill, or is it a little bit of a hill or a mountain that we have to climb? And then we can put in activities and roles and timelines in place. We're going to have certain things to happen. There's going to be a town hall meeting that builds awareness, video message from senior leaders, and so on. We're going to have our people managers talk at their teams about what's in it for them. We're going to drive desire, and so on and so forth. So activities, roles, and timelines. And the ADKAR blueprint is really interesting because for each of those, for those of you who've used ADKAR before, this is a deeper dive into some of the key concepts here. Because moving beyond a barrier point where someone is not progressing at all the way into the gap between awareness and some of the other elements. So if the gap is awareness is very small, well, then you don't need to scale up a lot of activity, awareness messaging, and so on. But in many projects, the desire barrier point is a big one. And if that's the case, then you should expect more effort there. So the gauge gap is really to help you identify, should you spend a lot of energy, a lot of effort into building this gap, or will this be a relatively small effort that you will need to put into this particular gap? So that was the fourth element. The fifth element is how to use ADKAR to activate key roles. So I'll introduce you one more concept of application. And before we close out, I'll have a few minutes left for some questions and answers, hopefully. There's 10 minutes to go, so that should be about 4 minutes or something for Q&A. But I want you to think about how you might use ADKAR to activate key roles. And again, thinking beyond just simple ADKAR elements, we're going to point our ADKAR model at role fulfillment versus change adoption. So think about that for a moment. The difference between ADKAR for role fulfillment versus ADKAR for change adoption. Let me show you what I mean by this. So if I have people in my project, let's pick my sponsor for a moment. Okay, a primary sponsor. So my primary sponsor, I want that person to fulfill a role in change management as a primary sponsor. So I need them to have awareness of the need for change management. I need them to have a desire to participate and support the change management efforts, but then they need to have the knowledge on how to fulfill that specific change management role of primary sponsor and the ability to fulfill that role of a primary sponsor. And those of you who are exposed to the Prosci material or the 3-day certification course, you've probably seen what we call the ABC of effective sponsorship. Active and visible to participate throughout the project, build a coalition of sponsorship with peers and managers, and communicate directly with employees. So the A, B, and C. So these are the 3 primary roles of effective sponsorship. So think about your primary sponsor coming into a role. How might the ADKAR model look to assess their ability to role fulfillment? So now I want you to think about a primary sponsor for your project. And if you're on multiple projects, to think about one project and one primary sponsor. Think about what level do you think that they have on awareness for the need for change management? What level do you think they have on desire for fulfilling the A, B, and C, their role in terms of this? The knowledge level in terms of fulfilling this role, ability level, and reinforcement. Think about, and again, think about that person. What do you think is the barrier point for your role fulfillment for the ADKAR on your primary sponsor? So again, go to PolyV and then type in either A for awareness, whether it's desire, whether it's knowledge, whether it's ability, or whether it's reinforcement. What is the barrier point for your role fulfillment ADKAR assessment on your primary sponsor? What do you think is their barrier point? So I have some with awareness, more with desire so far, knowledge, ability, reinforcement, yes. Knowledge. Knowledge is coming through, yeah. So awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. That's a really, really interesting picture. That's a really interesting picture. So most of you are pointing out knowledge. So obviously it's very individual and very unique, and therefore you'll have different answers. But most of you point to knowledge, and that's actually what we see as the most common ADKAR barrier point when we look at our research. The most common barrier point for sponsors is the knowledge barrier point. So that's one of the hardest ones for us to get past. In fact, the Prosci research tells us that 52% of sponsors have some or no understanding of their role in primary sponsors. I have certainly met many, many sponsors where they do actually want to be good sponsors. They're quite motivated for it. They just don't know what their role is. They have not been trained. They've not been educated in understanding that they have a role towards change management and that this is what it is, the A, B, and C. So fill in that knowledge barrier point is in fact one, maybe if that's what you've identified, then what you can, once you've identified that, then you can create some concrete steps for how to help your primary sponsor. Let's do the same for the people managers, for the managers closest to the employees. Here we can do the same thing. We don't call them the ABC roles, we call them the CLARC roles, C-L-A-R-C, so it is communicator, liaison, advocate, assistant manager, and coach. And again, think about what might their, so and again, I know this is a huge group, and this might be 10 people, it might be 100, it might be 200 people. But just think about an average manager in your organization for your particular project. What do you think is their barrier point for their role fulfillment? Again, go to PolyV and see what do you think is their. Here we have desire, knowledge, ability. It's also some awareness. Awareness, desire, knowledge, ability. Yeah. It's also knowledge here, yeah. But also many awareness, many desire. Okay. Thanks a lot for that. It's interesting when we look at, and again, It obviously is hugely unique from project and person to person. But we can see that it's interesting that for the people managers, we see that it's often desire that is hard to get through, because there's really a dual ADKAR going on here. So there are two ADKARs. There is engagement in the change itself, and then there is the role fulfillment of being a good manager as a change manager. So desire is a really interesting barrier point for people managers, because we have to have good answers to what's in it for them in terms of the change itself. And then we can leverage leadership, and we can look at research, and we can try to activate them and see how we can get through the barrier. So, but we can actually work very systematically with this. So in our 3-day certification workshop, we work with something called a role roster. The role roster is really a way to activate the different roles that we need to have to help us make this change a reality. And this is a very good visual where we have the core roles: primary sponsor, people managers. You can also put project manager in here, or extended roles. It could be an HR a network or something like that. Put the initials and then the ADKAR. And then you can say, okay, if that's where the barrier point is, what activity, what activation tactics, what specific activities do I need to do in order to make sure that these people do help out as much as they can? So we can also use ADKAR in order to activate the key roles in our change. So this was a real quick webinar, and the key in this webinar is ADKAR, the world's best model. And we started off by saying that, you know, every time we do a change in an organization, it's really an individual change. The ADKAR model is an individual change model and help us diagnose and help people through their individual change journey. We can do that in personal change. We can do that at a workplace. We can also use ADKAR as a way to align the change management effort or the people journey with the project milestones. And we need to align those two so we have ability by the time of go live. And finally, we can also use ADKAR in order to activate key roles. So we have a few minutes for Q&A. Once you think a little bit about a couple of questions, I just would like to hear from you. How will you use ADKAR next week? How could you, have you been inspired to do anything with ADKAR next week? It could be at home for helping your teenage sons and daughters to clean up their rooms, or it could be actually on the change that you have going on in your in your company. So write down here if you have any responses. I'll be happy to see them. Also, if there are any questions, I'll be very, very happy to take them now if you have any comments. Renaud, has there been any questions?
Yes, Martin, we have received 3 questions. The first one is the following. Is there a practice for what activities and support each element of what can we do to support and drive desire, just to focus on the D, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think desire is actually the most difficult barrier point for managers. That's the one they struggle most with. So when I come out to organizations and I say, okay, which ADKAR is an issue for this particular change, many of them will say desire, and many of them will say afterwards, I have a resistant group, or some don't like this, or some cannot see why they should be participating in this. Or it could be that there is simply too much change going on, change saturation. So so I don't know how to move on with that. I can literally talk for hours and hours about this one, but I will just first highlight maybe the 10 tactics that Prosci has created for resistant management. They are really, really useful. They're very low practical and very useful to help people managers work with desire in the ADKAR model. And you can go onto the Prosci website and look for the 10 tactics, or you can also look on our website. We have written a blog about about resistant management, I'll definitely encourage you to do that. But I will look at the 10 tactics for the desire, if that's the problem.
And a second question is about to what extent we should be satisfied with reaching a level 4 on every aspect of the ADKAR model. If we want just to make sure that a change is successful, do we really need to achieve a 5 on every aspect of the ADKAR?
So I don't think we need to go for perfect or for 100%. That's the last points are sometimes a little bit too much effort to gain too little, but we should try to get to 4. It also depends a little bit on what kind of change are you looking at. Are you talking about a must-win battle, most critical 5-year strategy project that must not fail in your organization? I would probably go that extra mile to try to get as high score as I possibly can. Is this an implementation of an IT project and you have 5 of these each year? So then 4 might be good enough. It could also be that there might be a specific group. It might be with the salespeople, or it could be with HR, or it could be with the people sitting in Bulgaria, whatever. It could be that you identify one group where you say, these people need to be at a 5 because they are so critical for the benefits of this project. And then maybe it doesn't matter with these 3 groups because they are less important for the benefits of the project. So I do think it is worth thinking a little bit about how much effort should we make into building the ADKAR elements in this particular project. And differentiating, I think, makes a ton of sense.
Okay. And then maybe a final question before we close the session. We've seen that the sponsor have to focus on 3 roles, being ABC, and the managers on the famous Clark the roles. But what about if the managers do not adhere to the change because they are supposed to be the ambassador of the change, to provide feedback, but if they do not want, if they resist themselves to the change, what about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the most common and most difficult issues that we have. We say that in order for managers to be good people managers in times of change, they must score high on awareness and high on desire for the change itself. If they do not score high on awareness and desire for the change itself, they will not be able to fulfill their roles as people managers for the change. So we need to do whatever we can in order to make them high on awareness and high on desire. And sometimes that's maybe not something that we can do something about. Maybe we need to have the people manager to activate them and try to help them get the high desire for the change itself. Because if they score 1 or 2 on the desire for the change itself, working as effective as a people manager will be really, really hard in times of change. So that is a problem, and something you probably will need to address, but something that you will need help addressing. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Morten, for answering this last question, and thank you to all of you for being there today. I do not think that we have left an answered question, but if you have additional questions, feel free to send them over to me, and I will transfer your question to Morten or to anyone else in the organization. We absolutely love to answer some questions that you may have. Please note that the webinar has been recorded, and the slides will be made also available along with the recording on our website in the coming days. Feel free to share it with colleagues. It's free, the access is free to it. And for those who are willing to dig deeper into the topic, please visit the blog of Nexum, and in the message that you will receive tomorrow, you will get some additional information about the ADKAR model and what we have been publishing about it. If you would like to be kept up to date about our training program or publication, podcast or webinar, you can simply subscribe to our newsletter and we will keep you up to date. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, which I really encourage you to do, because we publish very regularly new information about change management, and Morten is even publishing a curation of the best content about change management on the first day of every month. So keep an eye on that. And of course, if we can help you, if you have some specific project, let us know. Finally, please note the dates of the next 2 webinars. On the 22nd of April, we will cover the theme Defining Change Impact to Support our people through change. In this webinar, we will have a deep look at the 10 different aspects of a change to consider when the time has come to evaluate the impact on people. Please know that this will take place at 1 p.m. again. And on the 20th of May, we will consider the advanced application of ADKAR. It's an extension of today's theme. Registration will open soon, and if you're interested, feel free to register, because the number of seats is, well, it's high, but it's limited in the end. What I have to do is just to wish you an excellent Friday afternoon and a great weekend, and see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.